The Solar Way by Nina Roudnikova. Arcanum 8. Justice. The symbolic picture depicts a woman sitting between two columns on a cubic stone. She is dressed in long clothes. Her eyes are blindfolded. In her left hand she holds a scale, in her right a raised sword. The Romans used this picture to depict Themis, the goddess of justice. The domination of the spirit over the object, asserted by the seventh principle, would lead as a result to the destruction of the world, that is, to its immersion in the divine subject, because the world cannot exist without the balance of the two forces acting in it. The apparent predominance of the centripetal force is compensated by the fact that the potential of the central divine consciousness includes opportunities from the inexhaustible source of the Absolute. The more the centripetal force is loaded, the more consciousness leaves the world, the more the divine consciousness is strained by the radiation of new creative possibilities, and, as the evolutionary process intensifies, the creative force also increases. Therefore, nothing is ever repeated in the world, but creative possibilities are always manifested in it. The world is not at all a once and for all set static material, the dissolution of which is engaged in consciousness in the process of evolution. The domination of the spirit over the form does not mean the destruction of the form, but it only makes it possible for its boundless transformation. Therefore, the universe is eternally renewed and never ceases. The days and nights of Brahma should be understood not as periods, but as a constant process of two cooperating forces. Without the balance of these forces, no phenomenon, no form can exist. A violation of the equilibrium in the direction of evolution burns the form. A violation of the equilibrium in the direction of involution leads to ossification and decay. A living form, a living phenomenon, is the result of the balance of forces. In the earthly world, in which involution is illegal for humanity, this balance acquires an ethical character, the balance of good and evil. In the total sum of the ethical manifestation of the earthly world, these forces are the same. The general evolution does not at all consist in defeating evil with good, but in refining the forms of ethical manifestation, forcing the opposite force to refine the methods of struggle, and refinement is possible only with the spiritualization of consciousness. Thus, when evil becomes more refined, it loses its sting. Rivalry grows out of struggle, and a commonwealth of power grows out of rivalry, spiritualizing and realizing power. This equilibrium is not an exact account of both forces at each acting moment. It must be understood in dynamics. The higher the ideals that the best part of humanity lives by, the more terrible is their distortion by the rude part. The lower the ethical level of peoples, the stronger the thirst for and search for religious aspiration among the best part of people. That is why often the highest aspiration generates the most nightmarish, blasphemous grimaces. That is why terrible crimes often lead to the awakening of consciousness. And that is why the teachings of the average height are usually better realized in the masses, although they do not give insights of the highest tension. Symbolically, this can be represented as follows. The higher the right scale rises, the lower the left one falls. The higher the left cup rises, filled with the longing of the hearts for the spirit, the lower the right one falls, illuminating the consciousness of the lower planes. In the name and strength of power of construction, it is necessary to take into account and balance these two forces in every activity, which means that the highest spiritualization of one's own consciousness, the subjective side, and taking into account the lower side are necessary. The balance of phenomena and the form depend on the proportionality of the whole and the parts. It is the incommensurability of the parts with the whole that causes all the tragic misunderstandings in the life of mankind. All self-abasement and self-aggrandizement have a disastrous effect on our life and activities. We must remember that our personalities have a price as diverse vehicles of creativity for the common good. But any overestimation of the importance of the personality and experiences, as well as an underestimation of its creative forces, destroy our consciousness and general construction. In the ethical world, balance is reflected by justice. Justice consists of two scales, the scales of severity and the scales of mercy. Rigor takes into account the legality of causality and raises the sword of retribution as a consequence of the generated causes. Charity takes into account the future, the possibility of expedient development of consciousness, and forgiving the past in the name of the future. Only those who take into account the law of mercy have the right to raise a punishing sword, not in the name of revenge for a violation of the balance, but in the name of cleansing consciousness. And only he can show real balance who knows how to judge with rigor. Such mercy will not be an indulgence of weakness, but will help to open up new opportunities. The great law of nature also works in its relations with humanity. The law of causality governs all natural phenomena, that is, the environment in which a person acts, and the part of human consciousness that belongs to this environment. And only his creative initiative, that is, the subjective world of a person, is governed by the law of expediency. These are two naturally acting forces of the world. The great quaternary law of dynamics governs the universe, so every initiative must take into account the environment and manifest itself accordingly. If the environment is not suitable, or if an individual initiative cannot join it, then no evolutionary creativity will occur. The natural results of universal creativity depend on the spiritual potential of creative individualized initiative and on the intensity of life in the environment. In addition, an individual initiative is connected with the results of its past actions, in other words, the environment, the conditions of activity, as well as thoughts, feelings, and volitional impulses are objectively the result of pre-existing causes, and it is actually impossible to escape from the law of causality anywhere. The great law of universal dynamics, as it were, builds a square around the subjective initiative, enclosing every manifestation of creativity in its cage. It would seem that there is no way out of this cage built by the dynamic law manifested in the objective world, because every cause must have an effect that binds the subject. If we want to get rid of this fate of the objective cell, the consequence of previously created causes, then there is only one way left, namely, to force ourselves to go inside ourselves, to direct the law of universal dynamics in the opposite direction, and not passively wait for the consequence, giving ourselves up to the flow of life. By freeing our consciousness from the impressions produced by these consequences, that is, by developing a dispassion towards the objective world, we can neutralize them for ourselves. The path of man in the subtle world goes against nature, against its dynamics, which embodies causes into effects, spirit into form. This path against nature must be carried out, first of all, inside your own consciousness, namely, by directing it into the spiritual world, increasing its strength, and not being carried away by the whirlwind of life. This striving for the spirit twists the cycle of the dynamic law in the opposite direction. The direction of spiritualization, that is, evolution, and the goals of spiritual achievements are set by the subject and are not sought in the objective world. Therefore, the law of expediency, according to which the flow of evolution is moving, although it excludes complete freedom of creative manifestations, but in itself at its root is a product of inner spiritual freedom. Thus, the ideal of consciousness and subjective freedom are opposed to the materialism of nature in the cell of the objective world. But this freedom is realized only if the forces of our consciousness are directed to the construction of a subjective ideal and not objective values. In this case, the ideal struggles with the forms of the world, the goal with the cause, evolution with involution, human consciousness with nature. And only in this way, building subjective ideals, a person can not only get out from the constraining framework of the environment, but also to influence the nature of their activity, as well as the transformation of natural conditions and the thinning of the forms of their environment. Of course, this struggle takes place in the subtle world. The rape of nature in the physical world is unacceptable. By this process of freeing consciousness from the framework of natural regularity and building a new regularity, a subjective square is symbolically created inside the objective square, directed by angles to the sides of the first and striving to break through them. It can be seen as an eight-sided star. This symbol she's describing if you were to take the points of the square out. So a square with a diagonal square inside it. And we see also already in this Arcanum Justice a strong analogue in the High Priestess, who is also seated between two columns. And we have heard in detail how the theory of binaries and their neutralization comes out with great force in this Arcanum, the eighth. And we remember as well from the Pythagorean tarot that the eighth gates are barred by rivalry, delusion, memory, and inertia. And this is what Nina Roudnikova has been talking about, the getting things moving. If you want to overcome some of these hurdles and obstacles and karma and, causes and effects, then you need to overcome inertia, the principle of inertia. Nature encloses our personality in the framework of material instincts, awarding them to our etheric body. These instincts are the instinct of self-preservation of one's own person, the instinct of the struggle for existence, which includes nutrition, procreation, and gregariousness. A person sublimates these instincts, that is, does not manifest them as required by the natural law contained in him, but forces them to serve the achievement of his ideal. The instinct of self-preservation, which causes mainly cowardice, he transforms into the heroism of self-defense in the name of the ideal. The instinct is the struggle for existence and self-affirmation of oneself as a spiritual worker who gives spiritual values to the environment instead of the received matter. From the instinct of preservation, he creates a spiritualized love, which encourages him to create creations of cultural value, that is, the sexual instinct. He transforms the herd instinct into a social cooperation of mutual exchange. Of course, this inner square must rest against the walls of the outer one. That is, the spiritual constructions must take into account objective facts, otherwise they will be utopian and will not produce the desired effect. And the action is the following. While the person lives and works in the world, he never can get away from the actions in this world. Quaternary law of motion, that is, to break through the wall of the square. He could not. But as you expand in consciousness and grow the personality, one may push the inner square of the external wall. That is part of a more broad, general, and therefore more spiritual cycle of world law. Thus, by pushing the boundaries of nature, he fills them with new content. So by pushing these boundaries, he makes the eight-pointed star, to envisage this symbolically. We start off with a diamond inside a square, and through the force of his own consciousness and In the act of overcoming inertia, he creates the 8-pointed star. An 8 also being a number of Christ. This is the way of man against nature, which results in the cooperation of two forces and two laws. Symbolically, it is expressed by the two intertwined squares, where the outer quadrilateral encloses our subjective aspirations and the great law in its cage. Causality is the law of world dynamics, directed towards differentiation and involution. It can be called a quadrilateral of karma. Karma is the reverse effect of the generated chain of causes and effects on the subject who gave birth to it. Although we develop and grow by the evolutionary path of expediency, our objective causes, our objective manifestations, that is, actions, are links in the causal process because we ourselves are the result of our creative manifestations. Everything generated, isolated, is bound to the parent by a great bond of responsibility, and in turn affects him, causing further evolutionary work. Therefore, all our actions aimed at the common good strengthen us, as Vivekananda says, by the forces of 1,000 angels. And all our actions aimed at harming the world are like a tiger ready to tear us apart. So we all constantly receive return blows from our actions. Some accelerate our spiritual growth, others slow it down, but both are strictly connected with everything that we have done and spawned. In the general universal construction, initiative creative consciousnesses are connected with the environment of action and the results of work, and this connection allows the creative consciousness to leave the environment of activity prematurely until the possibilities are exhausted, and protects the forms from premature dissolution. Karma is the history of the development of our consciousness, the history of our journey in the universe, and our repeated stays on Earth. Earthly humanity, having one common task of cultural construction, binds all its members with a common karma, and only the fulfillment of its task that can completely free our consciousness from universal karma. This means that the karma of humanity falls on all its members, and everyone, no matter how pure and high he himself is responsible for all the mistakes of humanity. Therefore, the last task of the higher forces is to indicate to humanity the ways out of the situation created by it, and to teach it the formation of its karma. In addition to universal karma, a person, being born in the environment of a certain people and race, performs the tasks of this people and this race, and is connected with them by common psychological traits, bearing the consequences of these. Thus, it is impossible to consider a person's karma separately from the karma of all mankind and from the karma of the people to which he belongs. This is a common karma. Against this background of humanity and nationalities, his personal karma is determined and develops, that is, the chain of causes and effects that he has developed during all his earthly lives. The human soul cannot immediately reveal all its possibilities to achieve perfection during one incarnation, but the whole series of incarnations, gradually unfolding its creative potential and the path of its evolution, builds a ladder of the soul's ascent to perfection. This is personal karma, since it is made up of the actions of a person determined by his character. Each incarnation is full of actions and deeds that determine the formula for the next incarnation. This general formula is developed in the next incarnation by its karma, specifically by the nature of the new personality in which the soul is clothed, and by the special conditions of the environment of its birth, suitable for its further development and the repayment of previous debts. This incarnational karma, living, acting, manifesting in its new stage, again forms a chain of causes and effects, which is eliminated by the fate of the incarnation of this person. Thus, a person carries a triple karma: general, universal karma, racial, national, social, personal karma, and incarnational karma. Of course, As a being belonging to the cosmos, a person embodies the karma of the whole world. Only a strong person can comprehend all the responsibility that lies upon him. We must understand that karma is the resultant of all our existences at every moment of our life, that we manifest it all in every action. And therefore karma, or as it's vulgarly called, fate, is inside us and not outside. Having taken this point of view, we translate karma into an inner square, created from, and we turn the forces and cycles of causality in the forces and cycles of expediency, and thus we gain internal and external power over events and the environment. Thus the sides of the outer square break through, and causality and expediency are intertwined into an octagonal star of cooperation. So the subject overcomes and transforms the object and the person, nature. All beings of the world, if they act and create, are connected by karma with generation. Similarly, God, the creator of the worlds, is bound by the world karma and carries it, which means that he carries the karma of all beings and each of people. Whoever understands this, it is easy for him in the world because he can put all his burdens on God, in return embodying his spiritual ray and doing his work. In this way, a person is freed from the karma of the incarnational and universal humanity and bears the karma of God, the yoke of which is easy. Another expression of the same is performing an action without a seed, that is, without personal interest in the action itself and its results, but perceiving them as fulfilling God's orders and tasks. Moreover, the whole life can be perceived as such an assignment. Such actions do not multiply either incarnational or personal karma, because God is responsible for them. Of course, the condition for such a victory over karma and the throwing off of its yoke is complete selflessness, non-attachment to one's own personality and the results of actions. The one who understands and is able to implement this is freed from the outer square and is called liberated.